Welcome in Foxamt and welcome in all my chat. Today is the grand debut of TofuTechTalk episode 4, and my guest today is Foxamt. I'm sure the Fox means Fox. What's the rest explanation of your name?
AMT is actually my initials.
Ah,
Yeah, a lot of people call me Fox Amped without knowing that, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault. I don't make it obvious. Some people are like, "Why didn't you make it capital?" I was like, "It looks weird. It looks
okay.
weird."
But
And
we
then people are
all
like,
can call you Fox, yeah?
"Yeah, more than welcome to Fox,
Perfect.
Foxy." Some people call me ATM machine, even though that's not how it works. But hey,
Wow.
I don't complain.
Perfect. And first of all, I just want to say welcome, and second of all, to say a huge thank you for coming on to Tofu Tech Talk. I really appreciate it, taking time out of your day. I know that you are a Twitch streamer, but you don't really usually stream science and technology, even though you do have a STEM background. So I guess this is an
Hmm.
opportunity for your friends to see, your science
Yeah,
area.
yeah.
And I suppose a basic introduction of what your STEM background is.
Nice to meet you all. I am Fox. Also, thank you, Tofu, for this opportunity. I definitely been enjoying. Granted, most of the times I'm lurking in your channel, but I had more opportunity recently. I was in transition from my previous contract to now I have a new contract coming up next week. Also a chemist role, but I'll be working with GC Instruments, more hands-on, and we'll be testing on tobacco and smokeless tobacco and different products in that, different research in that realm too. But I studied forensic science in college a while back ago, and I've been on a journey from toxicology as a toxicologist to a technologist, a scientist, clinical lab technician, medical technologist,
I'm so sorry to
senior
ask. How
QC chemist.
how old are you? I'm so sorry. You look
How
like you're
old am I?
younger than I am. You look
Oh
younger
man,
than
oh
me.
here we
Excuse
go. Oh
me.
God, I hope my
Okay, don't
mods
call you
aren't
out.
here yet. No, 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 no. I always have this fun game where I play with my mods, and he's always he's like, oh man, he's much younger than I am. And I'm like, yeah, sure, yeah. But I literally turned 30 this past October.
Okay,
So a lot of people think I'm like
in your
mid
20s.
20s or
Yeah.
low 20s, and even some younger people, like people I was working with, they're like fresh out of college. They're like, I thought you were one of us. I was like, I don't know if that's a compliment. I don't know if my personality is as young as you guys, or I just happen to look that young. I don't know. I don't know, but I'll take it. I'll take it when I can because I think I'm starting to understand what they mean. Like, oh, you don't look 30. I was like, what do you mean? And I'm like, I guess so. I'll take it. I'll take
Of
it.
course, it's a compliment. You look a lot younger than you actually are. So
Thank you so
not that
much.
30, not that 30 is that old, to be fair. I'm not far from it myself. So you
May I
start
ask how old are you, or is that allowed? Or
28, 28, of course, it's
oh
okay.
my gosh, you made it sound like tofu.
What? Made it sound like
What is
what?
this? I was like, oh man, she makes it sound like she's in her 30s. No, she doesn't even know what achy knees or a bad back is
I
like yet.
have okay. We're not gonna list our all our back problems and everything. Okay, so you have a. I think you said that your bachelor's was in forensic science, right?
Yes, yes.
And then you did a kind of deterred degree a little bit with computer science or something like that.
Oh yes. Oh my gosh, how did I skip some things? So I had my major was in forensic science. I had minor in biology and chemistry. It was pretty straightforward to get those. And
Mhm.
also I studied gender, sex, women's studies. That was my third minor. And after I think a semester break, I pursued a postbac in computer science as an attempt to merge into the digital forensics field and get
Okay,
into that.
so that's criminology, basically, is it?
Yes, that is pretty straightforward to explain it like that. Like people say criminalistics, pretty much merging criminal justice and science into one field. But yeah, criminology is definitely accurate too.
Okay, and did you get an opportunity to work in criminology? Did you get to solve some
I
crime? with
I
your
I I did
detective hat.
whenever when I'm watching shows, I did get to solve some crimes, or when I'm reading Detective Conan, the manga, I was like, hey, we solved that together. We did that. But pretty much upon like really close to me finishing my degree, I did ask around possible internship positions. I almost interned as a death investigator while I was in my senior year of college, but that would require me to wake up at 2 in the morning while also going to some crime scenes and being an intern, of course, shadow, and also go to my classes and also captain a frisbee team. I was also captain frisbee. We were a competitive ultimate frisbee team. Um, but I haven't had the opportunity to immerse myself into crime scene investigation. That's pretty much like towards when I started forensic science to when I was finishing a degree. I was like, hey, I would love to get into crime scene investigation. When I asked about it, it's pretty much two options was laid out at the time. You could go the police academy route, or try to get up to 8 to 10 years of experience, whether it's through lab, science field, any type of capacity, and try to go that route
Hmm.
in terms of like immersing yourself into the crime scene investigation field. So I was just like, well, we'll do the latter. At the time when I was graduating, the climate was not the best time for police academy or even police. I was even thinking about like possibly doing that, but I still respect the people who wear the badge and things like that. Always will help them whenever they're in need, and vice versa. If I'm in need, I would call them if I need help. Um, Hopefully not in the immediate future, but yes. That's but that's pretty much the gist of it.
Okay. And so you graduated forensic science. It didn't work out to you with criminology. So what did it? What was your next career field, or where was your first field
So
experience?
my first field experience was applying to jobs, not for a couple of weeks, not for 1 month, but like 3 months while working still finishing the last bit of my work study job. And while I was doing this, I was like, holy heck, it is so hard to get a job. And like a lot of jobs out there, whether science or other jobs that's not science, it's like, hey, you need experience in this. You're like, oh, yeah, that makes total sense. Let me apply to some entry level positions. Hey, you need experience. I was like, how do you get experience for entry level position? I thought
The place
this
to
is
get
the
experience.
yeah, this is where we get experience. I And they hated when I would cite my experience in chem lab, physics lab, bio lab, orgo lab. I was like, we are working with these tools. This is how we get to this point. This is how we learn how to get to this point. How does that not work for you? It's like some people are really good at like when it comes to selecting their entry level job or getting selected for their entry level job to kind of have to smudge the part like, yeah, this was acquired in college, and that made it much more straightforward. It wasn't explained to me in that way. I was just like, I'm always like, I'm not always, but I was super honest about it. I was like, yeah, I got all this in college. They're like, yeah, just try to get experience in science field a different way. I was like, oh, okay, I'll do my best. So I was still working my work study job, and I reached out to my boss at the time. I said, hey, I'm really my term for this work study job is about to end. Do you have anything possible? Can you ask anything around? And she loved me. She's like, this is like probably like a year and a half working there. She's like, I got you. No, I'm gonna ask around on this field. So I ended up working as a research assistant. I was scribing recordings for cancer research and
Oh
also
wow.
for assistance living. So I around that time I also um, interacted with another employee on the same floor, and she one day just encountered me. She's like, "Hey, how's the job hunt?" I was like, "Terrible, absolutely terrible." She's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. You always have such a positive like vibe. Your personality is always so welcoming. The moment like I walk in, like I have a terrible morning to start with, and then I walk through the door and I see you smiling like you have nothing to worry about. I was like, oh, that's just my poker face. But I appreciate the
Fake it till you
compliment.
make it.
Yes. Yes, I definitely take that to heart.
Mm.
But she's like, "Hey, I know I have a friend that's a supervisor," and she's like at the time she was like close to 27, 28, and she was already a supervisor for a toxicology lab. She's like, "Hey, I could put your name in that if that's okay with you." I was like, "Yes, please. That would be amazing." And she's like, "Yeah, I could do that for you." And behold, literally next week, I had a call from their HR, came into their interview, and I wouldn't say I knocked it out of the park, but it did land me the job. Though there was a caveat. The HR guy was a bit interesting with how he interacted with me during the interview. Everything went really well. Showed me around the lab, and then we came back to his office, and he's like, "Hey, what activities do you do?" I was like, "Oh, I captained ultimate frisbee, so I'm still into that scene, and things like that." And he just looked at me. He's like, "We were going to drug test you, right?" I was like, I don't do drugs.
Why would
What do you
he
mean?
even say
What?
that?
I don't. I barely even drink. I don't even know. Like once every couple of years, I take a sip. Unless my mom doesn't believe that I never had a drink on my 21st birthday, then she buys 8 cups, and I'm like, oh, let's find a way to make this disappear, guys. Teamwork, right? But besides that, yeah, I don't drink. I don't do that. He's like, you sure? I was like, I thought I was sure. Do you know something I don't? He's like, all right, I'll take that. Also, what other activities you do? I was like, yeah, just that. He's like, no Pokemon Go, because at that time it was
Oh
booming.
my god, this is Pokemon Go there.
It was Pokemon Go territory, and he's like, "You look like someone who plays Pokemon Go." And I was just like, "I don't know how I feel about that. Does that mean I'm happy? I come off nerdy? Is it the tie? It's the tie, isn't it?" I'm sorry if I gave off that impression. He was like, "No, no, no, I'm just messing with you." And then he gave a nervous laugh. I was like, "I don't think you were joking about that." But I'll keep that in
Wow.
my thought bubble.
Yeah.
But I got the job. I was a toxicologist working at a toxicology lab. I was pretty much doing extraction methods, doing either solid to liquid or liquid to liquid extractions. Mainly worked on oral samples, occasionally urine samples, but also after 5 weeks into training, my boss calls me in. She's like, "Hey, I know we wanted you to work Tuesday to Saturday from 1 to 9, but here's your actual schedule." And I looked at that schedule and I was like, that's gonna be fun. She's like, "Yeah?" I was like, "No." No, it was night shift from 7 to 5 in the morning, and it was from Thursday until Sunday night, and I was just like, "Oh, oh." Also, no, I'm still working my research assistant job, so I'm I'm doing a nice juggling act in that lovely fall semester-esque type scenario. So from August until January, I was working 2 jobs, one as a research assistant as a scribe, and the other as a toxicologist, mainly testing for oral samples. And we pretty much it was for drug screenings, for job application, people sending
Oh.
um, their results that way. Occasionally, criminal justice proceedings, they would require drug testing that way, and the Department of Transportation would also send us
Mm.
results to test too. And I was like, "Phew, this is tough," because the days I worked as a research assistant was Wednesdays to Friday from 8 to 1 o'clock. And the Thursdays and Fridays were exceptionally tough, especially coming fresh off of night shift. And I would probably take an hour nap, maybe not even take a nap sometimes. I would just like, all right, let's figure out a way to make this work.
This is so bizarre that you're put into a situation to be forced to have two jobs to get by. Were you doing it to get by, or was there like a
Actually,
drive, or what was the reason why you were doing both of these things?
I just happened to be in that situation. I have a personality. It's like it's hard for me to say like, "Hey, I can't do this," or I felt like I was gonna let down the person who got me the research assistant job.
Yeah, so you,
She definitely was looking out for me, and I appreciated her a ton for what she did. So I
mm,
was like, "Hey, just make it to the end, make it to January of next year, and you will be fine." And I was just like. Oh, the moment I would walk into the office, I would be like kind of like dragging my knuckles on the ground, and, and Salvation was finally sitting in the computer chair in the cubicle that we would start our scribing in, and pretty much would get like separate recordings, pretty much holding interview process where they would interact with someone who is taking care of a terminally ill person or dealing with cancer and ask the nature of like, hey, what's your state of mind? What's your interaction with them? And do you see yourself being affected beyond this point, beyond the terminal point? And it was a great research project. It was just really tough to. I had to hit play and stop at least like 20 times to get my bearings. I'm also not a coffee drinker,
okay.
so staying up was a little tough. And there would be times where my coworker would turn her back and notice my head was already down. I was just like, so eventually, after an hour, I needed at least a couple of minutes to rest my eyes, and then I was good. I was good, and we were back in the thick of things after that. I just needed to jumpstart myself for that.
There was
But
a yeah. Just before you move on from the
of
toxicology
course,
part, Jimmy was just
yeah,
asking what is toxicology and why is it important. You kind of mentioned it. You dabbled into it that
yeah,
you were doing it, but you know, from a very like even I wouldn't know much details about your work, about your research. I know to you
yes.
it's very simple and straightforward, but we're actually interested. What is the science involved in toxicology? What is it? And yeah, if you can give any other information about it.
Pretty much, we do assay testing for different compounds to seek, because we were receive at the time we were receiving urine and oral samples. People called me the oral guy because I was mainly partaking with working with oral samples if they were available at the time, and we would test for different drugs, THC, which is basically marijuana or cannabis, or opiates, amphetamines. Bath salts. What else were there? There's a lot. LSD. There was multi drugs, which meant there was more than one test, and it could be a combination of THC, amphetamines, opioids, all in one sample
Mm-hmm.
to make it easier. And we will work with different instruments like HPLC, GC instruments, mass specs with LC, and basically these were liquid chromatography
Okay.
instruments, and allow you to break down or sift through and collect the compound that you're seeking to or not seeking to. Because a lot of samples, there would be a false positive, for instance, and it'd be like a lot of people's jobs are on the line when it comes to this, whether it's a job screening. At the time, not a lot of places were too keen on letting someone who failed a drug test because of THC in their system, things like that. But there could have been another let's see, they could have been ingesting something else and it had a side effect that could have gave a false positive for a THC.
Okay.
So they would probably have to take it again, and then we would clarify that with the results, things of that matter. And then there's the other side of it where criminal justice, a lot of people are like, hey, were you under influence when you were proceeding with this activity? It could be driving, it could be operating machinery, or it could be something as simple as a parole hearing or allowing custody for someone to have access to their loved one, and they were just happened to be at a really like inconvenient timing. So there's a lot of times where there's a lot of moving parts in that realm, and it could affect a lot of people's lives, especially if it's positive. But usually, we're that last like inclination, like, hey, they were negative, they're good to go. They did not fail their drug tests. Yeah, hire them, or hey, allow them to have custody, full custody of their loved one, things like that. But really great question, by the way.
Yeah, and leading question from that,
Oh,
Jimmy, thanks for the
yes.
explanation. And says it's also presumably toxicology is applicable to doping, to sports. Do you do tests on that as well occasionally?
Our lab did not test in that, and that's, oh my goodness, you appeal to my my sports junkie side. And I not in the way that I dope, but more so I'm super interested in a lot of sports. I pay attention to basketball, tennis, ultimate frisbee, of course, football, sorry, American football, and football when it's World Cup, and a couple of others. Like if there's anything like minor interest, it could be cricket, it could be hockey, anything of that sort. Rugby. I was like, oh, what's that about? And I get like some type of curiosity in that realm. Heck, when Lance Armstrong was being indicted for doping, a lot of people in the beginning are like, oh, that is. Why would you guys select him? He's honest. He's doing everything in his part. He does it the right way. He does it the clean way. And then we find out it wasn't so clean, and we're just like, oh my god, that shocked the whole, like, not just the cycling world, but also the sports world. And like me as just like superficially like seeing that, I was just like, man, that guy, he has so many influence, and not just sports, but also pop culture. He's always doing a cameo into, like, for example, he was in Dodgeball with Vince Vaughn and Ben
Mm.
Stiller, and a lot of people have this like this whole ideology is like, this guy is amazing, he does it the right way, and then years later shattered a lot of people's illusions, and like, wow, if he did that, then sports is sports is not
Do
as
you know how
cool
the
as.
doping process goes in how like if you were not to give us recommendations on
No,
how to do
no.
this, but if you were like trying to avoid getting caught for doping, do you have an idea of how they do it? Do you and your
um
coworkers talk about this? Like how if you were to like fail a drug test, is there ways of hiding it? Even maybe not for doping, maybe like criminal wise. Again, we're not
there, no,
asking.
no,
I'm not
no,
asking for a few, but in case I have to
fair
bury a
question.
body in future.
Fair question. Oh, that's also a fun question. I mean, a valid question, I mean. But that's something that's outside of realm of expertise, but I don't mind theory building on that. That's something I've seen a lot of shows attempt to go that, whether like, for example, the show Euphoria with
Hmm.
Zendaya and a
Yeah.
few other, they touch on that on the first episode on like what's the process normally you would get out of like from THC or LSDs. They're like, some people expect you to drink a ton of water, help dilute the like
Does
and
that
pee
work
it
a little
out.
bit?
It the biggest thing with that, it comes down to timing. If you
Okay.
know your job or some type of entity that needs your drug results, like if it's within 24 hours, you're
Hmm.
kind of out of luck. The only
Okay.
opportunity you would have, depending if it's a supervised,
Urination or
like
whatever.
exactly. Most of the time, even when you're doing drug tests, they'll allow you to go into a separate room, and they'll give you instructions. It's like, hey, do
Clean a
your
cup.
business.
Mm.
Don't flush. Don't flush, or that would void your results. And don't wash. Don't turn on the faucet until
Yeah. Don't
after
even
you
wash your
hand.
hands.
Nope. Nope. But you don't close the door. Depending on the place. Depending on the place, you don't close the door specifically. You would just hand them the cup. They're wearing gloves, of course, thankfully. You try not to touch the doorknob or the handle, but even if they do, they have a process that goes with sanitizing the handle after you leave too. So thankfully they do that.
Mm.
But some people would get a donor, not a donor.
Oh, someone else to pee in the cup
Yeah,
for them. Does that work? Is there a way, like, because I thought DNA is a thing as well. They'll know that it's not your pee either.
it depends on what they have as their instrumentation that relies on testing. Some just relies on like
If the
some
drug is
testing
in there or
kits.
not.
Yes. So
Mm.
if it went to that extent, then yes, that's completely valid. But some assay testing is just strictly for the compounds. It'll avoid the DNA.
Mm.
They'll test. They'll be like, oh, the name and all the description is on here. We're gonna trust that, and it just goes through a chain of custody that ends up at the destination. So some people would have urine sample from another volunteer who happens to be clean. Synthetic urine is an option, but you would have to, depending on the testing kit, some testing kits also track temperature. So it would need to be warm at the time. So like freshly out. So some people have to be as lucky to collect their volunteer sample almost an hour before they conduct their process. And sometimes that's a little tough because there might be a line. There might be a line leading up to you conducting your transmission of your urine sample into a
Yeah.
cup. So,
Still
but
don't know how to
it,
get away with drug testing here. Okay, so not that I need to know, but if I'm covering up a body that I'm burying, oh Jesus, the FBI is going to come to my door because I have a weird Google search in the last few days. Anyways, so you
whoa,
said
what were you searching? Whoa, tofu.
we were looking how to measure fall damage in video games, and I was testing how high from a building do you have to fall to guarantee death, and how fast in a car do you have to travel to kill someone. Anyways, that's a different thing. But
That's so amazing, by the
the
way.
drug testing part. So you say if you are tested from the moment you take a drug or the moment something happens like that, within 24 hours, you're pretty much fucked. I know
Yeah,
that there's
yeah,
three different ways to drug test, right? If I'm
yes,
correct, there's urine, there is
yep.
blood, and there is hair. Is
That
there a
is,
reason
yep.
why? Could you share which one is the like? Why those three? What are the pros and cons for them? Do you know any information about that kind of thing?
That's a great one. I think for me specifically, I didn't take courses dedicated to toxicology, and even the training program did not like specify like, hey, this is why we are doing urine and oral samples specific because we get oral samples, we get swabbings that are collected and placed into another liquid just to keep the integrity of the sample and go from there. So we would rarely get um hair sample. By the time I was getting ready to leave my
Position.
toxicology lab and
Mm-hmm.
become a technologist, they were actually transitioning to acquiring equipment that allowed them to test for blood samples. Blood samples would be like even harder to kind of like falsify the process because I think it would actually take into account the
DNA.
DNA sample and
Mm-hmm.
different things that goes in that. But that's a really good question. I would probably have to do further
No
research on
worries.
that.
And how long are the drugs in the system? Like how? Because you said within 24 hours you're screwed, right? Not
Hmm.
that we're trying to cover up any drugs here, okay? But if how long does do drugs take? And maybe it's drug
Uh,
dependent.
it's drug dependent, and it also comes down to the metabolism of the person that's
Okay.
taking it. So, like, an athlete probably would have a higher chance to get, well, that's dependent on a lot of things. It comes down to what's being tested, of course. Some sports like NFL, NBA are finally relaxing on some either the X drugs, the drugs that are not allowed to be utilized.
Mm-hmm.
Some were just like, oh, this gives too much of advantage, or hey, we need this to recover because this is a grueling sport. The like what it does to our body on a daily basis, running up and down a field or a court. We're some of the best athletes on the planet trying to entertain everyone and smashing our bodies into another person who lifts over 200 to 300 pounds on a daily basis. It's gonna do some wear and tear to us. We need to
Mm.
recover from that. So some people have different supplements they will ingest, and somehow that happens to be on their ban list. Some organizations are starting to look at it a little harder. It's like, hey, we could relax this, or a different route where people like, oh, what about THC? What about marijuana? I think NBA has recently started flexing the last couple of years, and I think as recent as last year, the NFL, National Football League, American football, started relaxing on that, and
Laxing as in like they're letting them take drugs now a lot more
they're
than they
letting
used to.
them taking a specific drug, THC.
What is
I don't know
THC? You've
about
said it a few times, but I actually don't
yeah.
know myself.
Let me give the proper. Let's see.
Hmm.
Tetrahydrocannabinol, and
Cannibal.
that's
Oh,
pretty
sorry.
yeah.
That's not what I meant.
And it's a lot of people will get it confused with CBD, with the basically a cannabidol. Oh my gosh, tongue
Mm.
twister. Cannabidiol, which is more of an oil base. CBD and THC is
Hmm.
more like also is like not psychoactive. Also, that's the difference between CBD. A lot of people will like push like, hey, if you're having aches and pains, try going the CBD route, and you can rub some of the oil on some of the joints or areas that you're receiving pain,
And do
or
they test
rely
that?
on gummies. They were actually more lenient on CBD. Some sports. I'm not sure all sports, but I'm not sure about gummies, but in terms of like ointments or applicate like the superficial application base,
Okay.
um, they were a bit more
So in the
relaxed with
States, it's
that
a bit more
until
relaxed now with the drugs in which they can
yes,
take. Okay.
yes.
Interesting.
A lot of doctors like who, of course, they've been working on their thesis with it, things like that. They're like, hey, CBD is legit. Um, it has done wonders for people who are recovering from a car accident or any type
Cancer,
of.
things like that, I hear.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. And I for someone who doesn't like smoke, for instance, or like take drugs, I'm not someone who is like on a moral crusade and like, no, you should not. You need to keep this sport clean. I'm I understand the big picture. If you're hurting, you're hurting. You need something to for that pain management. Of course, they're seeing doctors on a regular basis. They're seeing physical therapists.
Hmm.
They're working through their pain. They're coming back from surgery and things. Whether it's ACL tear, meniscus tear, pulled hamstring, tearing of a groin, anything. It needs something to help manage the pain, and some people don't react as well to like the over the counter type meds. They're like, hey, this is not, and they don't want to go the route of like an oxycontin or Vicodin, things of that sort. It's
Oxy's
like, hey,
nice.
that's a little too hard for me
I,
and a
I,
little too addictive too.
I promote Oxy. Had to take it once. It was great.
Oh yeah,
Very good. Very good for broken ribs if anyone ever needs it. Of
you were
course.
breaking your ribs doing what?
Two years ago I fell off my bike and I broke my ribs. It was great. Yeah.
Were you doing extreme racing? What
No, I just
tofu?
fell head over, and the my chest went into the what is it called? The steering things. Yeah.
The okay, the handlebar.
Yeah, I
Not,
just
yeah.
slammed into them, and that's how it happened. But yeah, I mean, I had to take Oxy, but it was good. It was good.
Yeah.
I don't know about the addicting part. I clearly wasn't, but I'm
Hmm.
not addicted to anything. I've tried cigarettes, drink, things like that, and
Oh,
I don't tend to
okay.
get addicted to things. So, except for video games, that's
I
a
was about to
problem.
say Baldur's Gate is a
Um,
different story for you.
well, yeah, that might be a porn issue, but that's a different discussion for another day. Thank you so much for informing everything about the toxicology part. And
Of course.
that was your last job before you're going to a new contract now. You have a new field.
So fun fact, when I was doing toxicology work, it was 2016 to 2019. So I was on night shift for roughly 3 years, give or take. And a portion of those years was also studying my post-bac in computer science.
Hmm.
So on top of night shift and also the first semester of 2017, I was also playing ultimate frisbee for my college team competitively. So I was juggling frisbee, night shift full-time job, and studying computer science classes, and that was a good time. That was an absolutely good time. Oh, while also having a relationship. Yeah,
Of
that
course,
was.
that's the toughest
Oof.
part of the whole thing.
Oh. I mean, luckily she was a nursing student, and eventually some of her courses required her to do night shift. So some of our days actually got on sync. But yeah, oh yeah, it was a absolute dream of a time trying to navigate 2 hours of sleep for almost two-ish, actually probably like 3 semesters, and that's where I had to wave the white flag. I was hitting the burnout
Of
stage
course.
by the summer of 2018, and I was seeing how I was interacting with people. I wasn't as nice as I am currently with you. I was a bit more snappy. I was seeing a full sink of dishes because we lived in a house of 5 people. I shared a room to get that nice, lovely, cheap rent. And whenever I would come home from night shift, I would see stuff was all over the place or the sink was full, and I would just randomly immediately start cleaning, and not in a way it's like, oh, this is so helpful, almost like, well,
Angrily.
harboring negative. Exactly,
Mm.
exactly. Just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you would do this. You hate me, don't you? You hate me. Well, and it would just kind of like be a seed that would be planted for like a ticking time bomb to like erupt later. And that was definitely something I was just like, yeah, this is not it. This I loved learning about computer science, but it was also a really tough field to get into as a beginner. For people who had like an introduction in high school or studied it since they were 12, they were thriving. It was absolutely amazing, like picking their brains on how much they knew about the subject. But like as someone who freshly got into it, their teaching style was much different from biology, chemistry, and
Mm.
physics for me. I was just like, oh, this is a totally
New
different thing.
world.
This is
Mm.
something you have to be working at on a daily basis. And for me, my time was, especially in my first year, my time was like, it was not built that way. Granted, I did not prioritize or set up a proper hierarchy of how my time would be divided, but it was still, when I was trying to make it work, somehow I was still being passed. I was always in my professor's office. I always made an effort to like, hey, I don't understand this. Can you elaborate why you decided to go with this format for making code? And our introduction to code was not Python, not what is the command prompt? I always forget what the original
Mm.
command on your PC is,
Hmm.
but that I was working on Java instead. Not super beginner friendly. Also, Python I would say is more beginner friendly if
Yeah,
you're
I
ever
like Python.
interested to get
Mm.
in. Yeah, I would highly recommend like, hey, it could be it could transition into the other languages like C hash, C++,
Hmm.
Java. Even if you're doing JavaScripts, it had some type of like, oh, this makes sense. And Java has that flexibility too, but it was just not as beginner friendly. And I was just always like, man, you're speaking a different language. And that was another thing about it. It's an actual
It
language,
is,
like
yeah. And you
Spanish,
start learning it very
French.
late in life, and we know statistically
Yes.
that if you start speaking languages younger, you're much better at it.
Oh yes.
With a
And
few
I'm a huge proponent of like computer science should be introduced like
younger.
at a younger
I
age.
agree, yeah.
Like be part of the curriculum, especially since we're transitioning into the digital age. Probably as soon as like middle school, even elementary, like part of the computer course. Just hey, you're allowing them to use tablets, might as well. Might as well. Like it could be like there's a lot of like kid-friendly activities out there that just makes it fun. And I ended up discovering these activities. Granted, I was still burnt out, so I kind of got sick every time I looked at code. I was just like, oh god, not that. I recognize it a little too well, but there were still these fun activities in regards introducing them to Python or like even utilizing GitHub.
Mm.
It was just more beginner friendly, kid friendly. And I was just like, and there's a lot more YouTube videos dedicated to like walking you down, like introducing you to the language. It was absolutely amazing to see. I always like, this will be amazing once it becomes really mainstream.
Mm.
It's going to be something entirely different, super eye opening, super beginner friendly. And like, that's one thing I had a conversation with my professor about. And she was like, hey, this is an intro course. What is it? I can do to also make it better for people who are trying it for the first time. I was like, yeah, the first 2 weeks were amazing. I felt like I was understanding the theory part. It's just the actual application of it was almost too quick for me. It was like, hey, I have training wheels on my bicycle. This is amazing. And then out of nowhere, 2 weeks later, she's like, hey, build a program that will randomize different pie flavors. And I'm just like,
I like that.
how do we get here? How
This
did
this
it's
is
like,
this, the meme of what you study and doing homework, what you study in class, what you do for homework, and then what's on the test.
oh,
They're two
oh
very
yeah.
different things. Yeah.
That's pretty actually the test was more theory based and I was okay with that. The toughest part was when they would have some segments dedicated to like, hey, write the code of this by hand. I was just like, all right, I'll just take the L on this. I'll put some things there, but I it's something I don't know perfectly. So sometimes I would get like it would be the reason I would pass the class. It wouldn't be the projects, it would be the exams. I was just like, holy heck. And I'm not even a good test taker. I was just like, if I have something that will hold me in these classes, it will be the exams and the theory part. Everything else, whew, that was that was absolutely tough. But talking to her about it, I was just like, hey, we went from having training wheels on grass to going down the street downhill on a motorcycle. We're building projects 2, 3 weeks immediately into our first semester. And she's like, well, you're supposed to be like working on this on a daily basis. I was like, yeah, that's if we have time as like on our side, but I'm also doing like night shift. And granted, I chose this.
Yeah,
I'm
they
not trying to
can't
pass
cater,
this off.
unfortunately.
Yeah, of course. I'm not trying to say, oh, you gotta make this work for me. No, I chose to work full time, pursue this degree, also play frisbee and other things along that side. I chose this, but it's also like this is not as straightforward as you're making it seem to be. Like, hey, if you keep doing the homework, which I did, I was always doing the homework, I was always doing the projects. It's just more like, man, it felt like we skipped a few steps and because at some point you feel more comfortable with the code. And she would say, hey, you're allowed to use Stack Overflow. I was just like, oh, okay, but don't rely on Stack Overflow. I was like, what is that? What are we? What are we talking about here? It just got confusing. It felt like we were talking in riddles sometimes. Hey, you're allowed to rely on help in class with your partner when we're in lab, but outside of class, no partner assistance.
Hmm.
I was just like, oh, okay. And that got really difficult in a lot of ways too. So,
So you're just discussing how difficult your computer science course was, and did that lead into the job that you're having now? Is that because I was
oh man, the job I have now,
or that you're
actually
applying
no.
or about to get? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I'm about to start my contract in tobacco and smokeless instruments that allow you to smoke and pretty much research into that the effects and they have like different like they walked me through the lab. I got a tour and they showed me areas where they kind of recreate that environment
Mm-hmm.
and it was pretty cool, like a smoking environment. Like they don't have like actual volunteer test subjects, human test subjects, or rats or anything. It's like actually just replicating with different apparatuses. I specifically don't know entirely what it was made
Like
of,
artificial
but
lungs and things like that.
I believe so.
Oh
Yes, yes.
wow.
It was pretty cool to see, and I was just like, you know what? And the first thing they asked is like, "Hey, are you okay with work doing research?" And I was like, "Oh, why wouldn't I?" I was like, "Oh, some people feel really different about tobacco and how it affects society and things." So I was like,
Oh,
"Okay, that makes sense
that
as a
actually
question to ask."
sides very well with Mary's question just here, saying what your views on the tobacco industry there. Um,
Oh, that's a great
if
question.
I get that you're working making the products less dangerous, but that morally, how do you feel about it? What's your position on it?
I have a couple friends who are smokers, and heck, whether it was weed or actual tobacco nicotine based products, um, I'm not someone who like get on a soapbox and like, hey, you're killing yourself. I know some people get into scenarios like that smoke does wonders for them. It affects their creative ability. It affects how they interact socially with other people, a community of some sorts. But also know like the drawbacks potential for cancer. A lot of things could cause cancer. I can't just like, oh, if you smoke tobacco or anything like that, you're gonna get cancer and die. It's like, hey, we could literally just walk around the earth for 30 years without smoking, and we would still get cancer. It's like I don't look at it like that specifically, but I also
Mm.
know like a lot of the companies kind of preyed on people's what would be a proper word?
Vulnerability.
The addictive
Mm.
qualities within nicotine, and that's where I would kind of frown on it. I was like, can there be a different alternative? Or can you provide like more information like, hey, this is what it can do for you? But they want to capitalize, make as much money as possible. That would deter people from their product. And I understand that the business side of it, as frustrating that can be personally, but I try to look at it in big picture. I know for some people they're experiencing a rough time in their life. They probably suffered a breakup, they probably had an injury, and they just need something as a release. And that's an opportunity for them to release. Sometimes it's smoking, sometimes it's someone drinking a beer, maybe a couple shots of vodka. I don't partake in any of those, but I'm not also one person who will shame you on that specifically.
Mm.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah,
That's
it
a great
was
question, by the
a good
way.
question. Yes, was earlier Jimmy had jumped in before we'd move just to the topic of if you had your time again, would you have gone to do the computer science part again from the beginning rather than doing your biology and chemistry education? Do you think you would have gone into computer science first? Could that because that could
So,
have helped your coding
oh my
experience?
goodness, that's such a great question. I the thing about it is I wouldn't choose one or the other. I would incorporate it in the way that I'm able to study computer science while also studying forensics and the minors in biology, chemistry, even gender, sex, women's studies. There was another course that I was partaking in my college career, and that was ROTC, which was more inclined to military route. And I was not specifically interested in joining the military. My mom, single parent, I was an only child. She was in the army for roughly 13 years and super amazing individual, strongest person I know. And she knows the benefits of that the military could provide, whether it's covering a lot of expenses in regards to like studying, school, all that jazz. And she's always like, "Hey, I know how you feel about the military. Why don't you try the Air Force? They will take care of you." And that was more of my appeasement route, trying to study ROTC, and I took probably like
ROTC stands
close
for
to 2 years worth of courses with that, and that could have been dedicated to computer science. The thing about computer science is I didn't know I needed it until my senior year of my bachelor's, which was like close to like 2016, and we were in our capstone class. Our professional practice course had a final project saying, "Hey, there's a couple of topics that we did not cover. Why don't you look over these and do a presentation of what catches your eye?" And what caught my eye was digital forensics, and I like the capability of allowing you to look into recovery of data that people thought they deleted and able to recover it
mm-hmm.
and like solve cases that way. So many different ways of utilizing computer science in a criminalistics or criminology perspective. That was
Mm.
absolutely amazing. I got super immersed into doing research in it. And I was super enthusiastic when we had to do our presentation to that. And I looked to my professor, I was like, "Hey, why isn't this a course here?" And she's like, "That's a great question. You should probably ask your advisor." And I did. It's like, "Hey, is it possible for like me to get into like digital forensics with just a forensics degree alone?" And she did not have an absolute answer for that. She was like, "Hey, there's a professor that she had before who actually knows a bit more information about that. He was someone who taught microscopy basically the study of microscopes. And I had to set up another meeting and with him. He was super amazing though. He was like, "Hey, try to go into the School of Engineering and talk to the computer science advisor and see how that goes." And I was like, "All right, I'll do that. Yeah, that'll be cool." And I scheduled that meeting, and the computer science advisor, super down to earth, super easy to talk to. He was telling me about the computer science, how amazing it is. I was getting captivated by how well he was talking about it. And he was like, "Oh, what year are you?" I was just like, "Oh, what do you mean?" She's like, "Yeah, if you take like one more year, you could finish this in 5 years, basically." I was like, "Oh, I'm graduating like next week," and he was just like, "Oh," I was just like, "Ah." He's like, "Yeah, if you're like a sophomore or junior, yeah, all you need is like one extra year, basically, just incorporate it into your current workload, and you would have had this." I was just like, and that was the tough thing. It was a tough pill to swallow. I was just like, man, a lot of things you just have no clue that you want to ask about that. And that's part of like one thing I would love to tell people about. Like if anybody had any takeaway from like this interview, it's more like it's an ebb and flow when it comes to finding out what works for you, finding out what you want to do. Because when I came to college, I was interested in science and art. I was
Mm.
like, I don't know how I'm going to make it work, but I am going to make this work. I went to VCU, which is Virginia Commonwealth University, and that's a school of arts, like dedicated, like top four overall art school.
Mm-hmm.
I think no, number one public art school, top four overall if you include private art schools. And I was like, oh yeah, this would be amazing. They have a great nursing program. They have awesome school of medicine. And I was really interested in pre-med. I had an interest in orthopedics since I was a sports junkie. I was like, oh, muscle skeleton, how it interacts with all these different injuries that athletes go through. I had knee surgery on my right knee, and I was just like, I would love to learn more about this. I came in with health exercise science as a pre med, eventually swapped over to biology. And then a friend was like, hey, why don't you try forensic science? I was like, forensic science? What's that? It's like, oh, trust me, you're going to love it. He was right. I did love it. I got into a couple of courses and I was just like, oh, this course is absolutely amazing. And then eventually I fell out a pre-med route and ended up what I did, pursuing minor in biology,
Mm-hmm.
chemistry, and gender, sex, women's studies, and then forensic science. But I was just like, if I knew what I knew then, oh, I would have asked this question a long time ago. But you just don't know until
Yeah.
you experience a few things and that light bulb clicks in your head and you're just like, oh, this is so cool. That curiosity bug starts to eat and you're just like, oh, I love this.
Yeah, it's
But
so
then
interesting
like,
the way you're describing the module. Like Jimmy just chimed in there, but it's actually a really
yeah.
interesting point because you keep talking about how, you've mentioned several times you were majoring in this, but minoring in
Hmm.
this, and minored in this.
Hmm.
It's such a, maybe there's other countries who do it, but it is such an American structure to the education because we
Valid
don't
point.
we don't do that in Ireland. We don't do that in the UK. Sorry, I don't want to
Hmm.
mention UK as part of we. There's a lot of European countries as well that I can reference. You don't have a choice of minoring or majoring in these kind of things. You have a
Interesting.
structure. You have a structure. You have like sometimes some courses will do something like they'll offer 7 subjects and you have to take
Hmm.
5 every semester, but they're all in the
Hmm.
same theme. But yeah, so it's very strange how you had so much options of minoring, but also from your description, especially when you were talking about computer science and how it doesn't mix very well with biology and chemistry, it sounds like you were like it's almost overwhelming. Do you know what I mean? You're
Oh yes.
taking two basically majors, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Hmm.
You can't just dabble into computer science. You need a strong foundation. You need, to me taking a minor in computer science sounds a bit like, oh, I'll major in any like history and then I'll do a minor in quantum physics. That's just How are you supposed to do that? Like, you need so much other physics before you get to quantum physics.
That's
So
such a valid like interpretation of what I've just said. No, that's absolutely amazing because like I mentioned earlier what school I had to go into in order to get immersed into computer science and like partake in like doing a post-bac study on it. I had to go into the School of Engineering, and it was a totally different.
building and society.
Yes, and the last time I took like calculus related math was in high school. I like went through all throughout college without having to do it. I got tested out of certain courses. Um, excuse me. Whether it was AP related route in high school, I had like freshman year I took one AP class. Second sophomore year I took one AP class. Junior year I took three AP classes, and by my senior year I took five AP classes. So I was able to get college credits
Hmm.
through that route and kind of get a little bit of a head start by the time I was a freshman in college. So I was kind of like starting off as like a freshman with maybe like a semester and a half of experience, give or
Hmm.
take, or possibly like an early sophomore. So I could have graduated by my junior year, and that ROTC time probably took away from it, but I can't dismiss that entirely. It taught me some leadership qualities that I still utilize to this day. It allowed me to captain my frisbee team and allow us to succeed in various ways. So I can't dismiss it in that realm. There's some leadership qualities that just instilled me to be a bit more successful in different professional practices that I ended up at. So I can't like immediately dismiss it, but like in terms of like what I would replace, I think I would replace that.
Mm.
Computer science would be able to commingle with biology, chemistry. The reason why biology and chemistry minor existed, a lot of my forensics classes overlapped
Of
in
course,
those
yeah.
realms.
There's clearly a connection there.
Exactly. So it just made it like, oh, this is like as straightforward as breathing. But yeah, interacting with computer science in a school of engineering where they take a whole different like I took it what was it? I think it was a logic course. And they pretty much approach it as like, oh, first day of class, oh, what is this true or false? And you're like, oh man, this class is gonna be awesome. And then halfway through, all right, so what's how do you arrive to this point when you get this formula of a question? I was like, when did this become a math class? When did this become a math class? And it's like a class of like 100 to 200 people. So that's not a question I actually asked, but mentally I raised my hand. I was like, when? How did we get here? I had to teach myself engineering type math by spamming YouTube videos every day until like 5 in the morning and using a dry erase board. I was like, all right, this is how they got to their point. Okay, this is crazy. How do you guys operate? What is this? And that was insane in a different way. I was like, wow, this is if I knew this was the case, yeah, I would have took more math classes in college and been properly introduced in the teaching style of computer science and what laid the tracks for the rest of the curriculum.
Yeah.
Oof.
Thanks so much
Oh man,
for
I'm,
all your
I'm I'm starting to
insight.
think back of like my thought process back then. I was just like, "Ooh, you did not know what you're in store for." I'm just like wide eye, super excited. You're like, oh yeah. By the time you're done with this, you're gonna be able to dabble with digital forensics. And I mean, I still hold that hope. If I do decide to go back to school, I think I would
You're
go back and
considering going back to school?
yeah.
If you were to go back, do you know what you're going to be doing?
People ask me a lot because I only have my bachelor's and I have partial post bac completed. They're like, hey, would you pursue a master's or beyond? And I have different thoughts on that. I said first I have to rid my student debt. I do still have student debt at my age. And
Oh
after
yeah, that
the
must be
recent
crazy in the
announcements,
States.
whew, that's definitely an understatement.
Can you?
There was just
Are you
like,
comfortable with telling us how much
oh yeah.
your degree was worth?
So it ended up being close to like maybe 34K just for forensics alone. And then when I was pursuing a post back with computer science, it pushed it up to close to like 45K total.
Mm.
Not like, oh, you add another. No, 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 no. Oh, I would be in a different. Ooh, I would be drinking something else besides
Bizarre.
water
And then
right
you were
now.
like struggling to get a job in your field for so long after getting that degree as well. It's shocking. Absolutely
Oh
shocking.
yeah, and I think the crazy part because I look at a lot of your content, and one post he did fairly recently that caught my eye was the reason you weren't doing I believe a
Postdoc. Yeah, I just uploaded
postdoc,
that a few days ago.
and that resonated so hard because it's just like the realization like how naive we feel looking at science when we get that degree that we were seeking, we were working so hard to get, and then we see how science is looked at from like, I guess more from a business standpoint, and it's such a air out of the sales type feeling. You're just like,
Yeah, it's a very
and it was so
difficult situation.
relatable what she had to say. I was just like, I know exactly what she means by this. You're like, you always look at people's reactions when you're like, oh yeah, I'm doing X, Y, Z. Me just saying I'm a scientist alone, people acted like I was from Mars. They're like, oh my gosh, he's a scientist. I never met a scientist before. I was like, I promise you, I'm a normal person. I'm just like you doing your job. I have no experience what you're doing. I would be fascinated by what you're doing too. And I'm just a normal person. You could do what I do. Once you get trained, I promise you. And I was like, that could be dismissive of like all the experience I have, but I, due to like all the jobs I went through, the path I went down, I was just like, companies look at science. It's like, hey, how are you going to be valuable to our interests? And it's just like, you notice like when you're applying to so many jobs or so many fundings or things like that, trying to get an opportunity, it's just not that straightforward. Sometimes who you know will definitely bridge that gap much faster, expedite it even faster. And you're just like, oh, I'm taken care of. And you see everything like, oh, this person made it big. That's amazing. And then you hear some inklings of like other people who like did something similar, but they didn't have as big of a breakthrough as said scientists. I was like, some people got lucky by who they know. Some people got lucky like the right person saw their research at the right time. And it's not to dismiss the hard work they did. By all means, they worked hard to get to that point. But when you get to that point, it could be demoralizing. It's just like when I saw that postdoc upload, I was just like, that is so relatable in so
So,
many ways.
in a way, in a weird way, you're glad that you didn't do a post grad then.
Um, I would say if finances wasn't an issue, I wholeheartedly push education no matter what. I
Okay,
will always
you think it'd be
be.
a teacher maybe?
Oh, that's
Maybe
something
that's what
that's
you go
pretty
back into
cool.
school for. I think it's easier as well as if
Yeah,
you have
yeah.
your degrees in science, then you just need to do a teaching kind of attachment thing. It might not be actually a whole degree, it could be just a certificate kind of thing.
Hmm.
I don't know how it
No,
works in the States. I'm sure each state has their own law.
they do. They have so many that you have to get like different licenses. You can be a substitute, but of course you want to be making as much as someone who has a license. Of course, depending on what type of degree you got,
Hmm.
bachelor's wouldn't be enough. You have to get a master's, X, Y, and Z. So there's a lot of things that are connecting, but that's a valid statement. Like teaching, I love seeing people that I work with um like that, seeing that light bulb, whether it's teaching them how to throw a frisbee, seeing them how to work on a specific instrument that they're not too comfortable with,
Hmm.
seeing that light bulb and their face light up and they're like, oh my gosh, I actually get it. It's like the most like oh type feeling. You're just like, yeah, you do get it and you're gonna thrive off of this, and I'm looking forward to see where it takes you from after this. And it's such an amazing, invigorating feeling to see that. So like that teaching statement is like, it's not too far fetched. It's just like It sounds amazing. How do we get to that point where we like comfortably can do that?
Well, look, if you ever go back to it, I wish you the absolute best of luck. You
Hmm.
clearly deserve it, and you worked hard for a lot of your life.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'll summarize by saying thank you so much for coming to the show and sharing your experience in your education career.
Oh yeah.
It was really interesting to talk about drug testing. Personally, I thought that was the
Oh
highlight.
yeah. Yeah. Oh
Appreciate your
yeah.
insight and the points that you made. Do you have any last words, last farewell, or last message to send anyone?
I would say you'll be surprised, especially when you get in a professional field. You'd be surprised how many people you encounter. You'll encounter the most amazing minds out there. Like, oh man, how are you here? You are definitely destined for greatness, and it's like absolutely inspiring to come across those people. Definitely pick their brains. They always have so much wisdom to offer, and so many stories. And then there's also a lot of other people who offer the most funny experiences that it's definitely absolutely fun to share stories over a drink or with other people. Especially in the toxicology lab, there was definitely a couple stories I was just like, wow, this is quite an experience. I can't believe I witnessed this in a professional field, but I love it. But yeah, I appreciate you so much for having me here. Absolutely amazing. I love your content. I love what you do. Always going through my reels and I see your posts. I'm just like, oh man, she's so amazing at what she does. And able to swap that hat whenever you're playing Baldur's Gate, or heck, when I was watching some of your clips when it was BRB and I was like, man, why do I hear her screaming randomly? I'm like, oh, she's playing Dead Space? Oh my gosh, this is
Me
absolutely
screaming? No such
amazing.
thing. No such thing as me screaming. I never
Absolutely
scream.
amazing.
All right. Thank you so much, Million Fox. I really appreciate
Of
it.
course.
If you guys want to give Fox a follow, there were shout outs earlier, but also his link is also in the title of the stream. I will raid over to a few people coming in. We will raid over to a friend of mine who's doing art at the moment. She just streamed video games, but she is doing some art today. A member of my community, and I'm reading over because you inspired me with your comment earlier of you wanting to mix art and science together. And
Yes.
Fizzy is a guest who was on Tofu Tech Talk, who is an artist, who is a STEM lady. So mixing those two realms together, that's what we'll do. But thanks a million, Fox. Good night. Farewell, guys.